Gladstone's introduction to political life owed everything to his friendship with the Earl of Lincoln, who was the son and heir of the 4th Duke of Newcastle. The two men were close personally as well as politically. They served together in cabinet under Peel in the 1840s and under Aberdeen in the 1850s. But the two men were close on a domestic level as well. Lord Lincoln was married to the highly spirited and beautiful young daughter of the Duke and Duchess of Hamilton, and the couple are seen here in the happiest days of their marriage in the 1830s. Unfortunately, the couple increasingly went through marital problems, and by the mid-1840s it was clear that all was not well between them. Lady Lincoln left the marital home finally in 1848, and increasingly concerned, Lord Lincoln asked his friend Gladstone to go on a mission to find out what had happened to her. Gladstone records with great drama the fact that he pursued her to Italy, rowed across Lake Como in a boat, dressed as a minstrel, went to the villa where she was staying, and there discovered to his horror that she was expecting another man's child. The revelation led to the divorce of the Lincolns in 1850, a fact which concerned Gladstone greatly and about which he wrote to contemporaries in letters of the period. It also had a tragic domestic consequence for the Newcastle family, which was recorded in the 4th Duke's diary shown here. The last entry in the 4th Duke's diaries in May 1850 relate a story when the 4th Duke was at the zoo in London and came quite unexpectedly across his grandchildren, the children of Lord and Lady Lincoln. Unfortunately, the family had been estranged from one another for so long that neither side recognised the other. Gladstone and Lincoln continued as political colleagues during the difficult days of the Crimean War in the 1850s. And Lincoln, who succeeded to the title of Duke of Newcastle in 1851, gathered most of the responsibility for the difficulties of the British troops abroad in his position as Secretary at War. Lincoln, as he now became Newcastle, suffered for this lifelong, and when he died in 1864 at the relatively young age of 53, he left behind him a mass of political and private papers. Gladstone was appointed his executor, and out of respect for his friend's memory, removed many of them to Harden Castle, which we see pictured here, the Gladstone family home. And even today, any researcher wanting to look at the 5th Duke's papers not only has to use the materials held at Nottingham, but also at Harden itself. There are also interesting reminders of the way in which Gladstone protected his friend's memories later in life. In the 1870s and 80s, for example, there's correspondence with the Duke's heir, Lord Edward Pelham Clinton, about the difficulties of finding an appropriate biographer. So letters from the period actually indicate Gladstone's concern that an appropriate historian will be chosen who will treat his friend's life and political career fairly. At the time of the 5th Duke's funeral in 1864, which was portrayed in the Illustrated London News, pictured here, Gladstone was actually one of the pallbearers, a significant personal reminder of the lasting legacy between the two men. Gladstone's appointment as one of the trustees of the 5th Duke's will, and therefore of his estate, continued his connection with the county of Nottingham in an interesting new way. It meant that he regularly came back to Nottingham to superintend work on the transformation of the old castle and parkland, which had long been considered for residential development. Work on this had been prevented by the fire of 1831, which had been a reaction by the Nottingham people to the 4th Duke's ultra-Tory politics. But during the life of the 5th Duke, residential development had begun apace, under the superintendence of the local architect Thomas Chambers Hine. Gladstone, as a trustee of the estate, had to superintend and sign off many of the residential developments which Hine oversaw, and documents from the period indicate the way in which he did so. So deeds and indentures bear Gladstone's name as the final seal of trust approval. But it also meant that Gladstone came back as a promising politician. By the 1870s, he'd already served once as Prime Minister, and his visits to Nottingham were treated as events of celebrity. A notable occurrence of this was in May 1875, when he visited the town on a state business to superintend the transformation of Nottingham Castle into the Provincial Museum of Fine Art, which it became at its opening 3 years later. But whilst in the area, he visited the park and noted that a tree was ready for felling. And Gladstone was a great axeman. One of his pastimes was felling trees for pleasure. And the authorities asked him if he wouldn't mind felling the tree in the park on their behalf. So, at great celebrity the next day, he set to work with an axe and felled a large Siberian elm in 50 minutes. And the people of Nottingham scurried around to try and catch some of the timbers which it produced. The event led to press coverage in the Nottingham Journal, and a plaque, which is in the park today, commemorates the site of that event. So Newcastle had left a legacy for Gladstone which continued his connection with the town and county into the 1870s and 80s. And it's one which is sometimes neglected today, but is permanently important. By the 1870s, Gladstone was a front-rank political celebrity. 2 decades earlier, he'd gained the nickname the People's William because of his reforming budgets as Chancellor of the Exchequer. And at about this time, statues began to be produced en masse. So you would indicate your support for the People's William by buying and displaying prominently a statue of the statesman. Another interesting survival of a commemorative nature are songs dating from the time that Gladstone was MP for Newark. This example here comes from a whole book of Red Club songs.
Oh, the Newark Red Club is a glorious thing, for freely when there we can chat, laugh and sing, without any fear of the slightest commotion, or telling our views toward Gladstone's promotion.
Composed specifically for convivial occasions at election time. The lyrics indicate the celebrity and the popularity which even young Gladstone had gathered to himself. Gladstone was not a universally popular figure even in Nottinghamshire, and evidence from the Viscount Galway collection indicates this fact. Galway was a Tory MP for East Retford for much of the period in which Gladstone rose to prominence as Liberal Chancellor of the Exchequer, and election posters, such as the one illustrated here, show the way in which Galway felt that the Liberals, under Gladstone's budgetary constraints, were actually tax raisers rather than tax cutters. There are also reminders of the cut and thrust of election time. So, for example, there's a speech here from the 1868 contest in which Galway offers his hostile annotations of the speech of his Liberal opponent. Conversely, Gladstone was on very good terms with the Denison family of Ossington, in particular John Evelyn Denison, who was a near contemporary and went on to serve as a Liberal MP and Speaker of the House of Commons. Correspondence from the Denison collection, particularly between Catherine Gladstone, Gladstone's wife, and Lady Denison, offer the couple's regrets at the passing of Speaker Denison after his death. Gladstone didn't just touch the lives of aristocrats and politicians, but of individuals as well. And the case of Thomas William Bush, the grocer and baker of Leenside in Nottingham, is a case in point. Bush was a totally untrained amateur astronomer who specialised in creating his own scientific apparatus. And in 1870, at an industrial working men's exhibition held at Islington in London, it gained the rapt attention of Mr. and Mrs. Gladstone, who were visiting it. Gladstone at that time was Prime Minister and was particularly attracted by the fact that Bush was totally untaught. Bush's celebrity was such that he gained the gold medal of the exhibition, and Gladstone, in his interest in Bush and his work, actually gifted to him some scientific apparatus to help him continue his experimentation. I think this goes to show that Gladstone, by this time as a grand old man, touched lots of people's lives in different ways. And really the purpose of this exhibition has been to commemorate the different ways in which Gladstone interacted with the people of Nottingham. He came to Nottinghamshire as a young man, as a Tory MP, but his connection with the constituency ended in 1846, and that could have been the end of the story. However, his continuing close relations with the 5th Duke of Newcastle ensured that Gladstone regularly returned to the county on estate and political business throughout the 1870s and 80s. The University of Nottingham, which has played a principal role in putting this exhibition together, has particular reason to remember Gladstone fondly, because he was actually at the ceremony for laying the foundation stone of University College Nottingham in Shakespeare Street in 1877. By this time, Mr. Gladstone was already gaining the reputation of being the grand old man of British politics. But in many ways, from his first visit to Newark in 1832 to his final connection with the county in the 1880s and 90s, he'd also become the grand old man of Nottinghamshire as well.
Long life to Chelsea,